When your own family laughs at your humiliation, you either break or you rise. This is the story of how one elderly woman turned betrayal into the most elegant revenge her children never saw coming. Subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because this is a story you won't forget. The laughter echoed through the Sterling room like a cruel symphony. "Go find another table, Mom. This one's for important people only." The words came from my adopted daughter, Clara, her voice cutting through the elegant restaurant like a blade. The chandeliers sparkled above, waiters froze mid-step, and my cheeks burned as the entire table, my biological son David, his wife, my grandkids, even Clara's husband, erupted into laughter. I leaned on my cane, trying to keep my dignity. I'd raised Clara since she was 8, poured 3 decades of love and money into her dreams. And here she was, humiliating me like I was a stranger begging for scraps. Only Margaret, my oldest friend, sitting at the end of the table, looked horrified. "Clara, that wasn't funny," I said softly. "Oh, don't be so sensitive," David added, waving me off. "It's just a joke." No, it wasn't a joke. It was a line I'd let them cross 1,000 times. The dinner was supposed to celebrate Clara's new boutique, one I had helped finance with $250,000. They bragged about golf lessons, expensive trips, promotions. Every time I tried to speak, they cut me off like I didn't exist. Then the bill came. Nearly $4,800. Without hesitation, the waiter placed it in front of me. "You're paying, of course," Clara laughed. "That's what grandmas do." Something inside me shifted. A cold clarity spread through my chest. I closed the folder and handed it back. "Just bring me the check for my meal." The laughter died. "You always pay," Clara hissed, her polished smile fading. "Not this time," I said, my voice steady. "Mothers support their children, but they're not obligated to fund disrespect." Robert, Clara's husband, cleared his throat. "Rachel, don't make a scene." "A scene?" My voice rose. "You invite me, humiliate me, then expect me to pay for it? That's not a scene, that's abuse." For the first time, the table fell silent. Margaret stood, her presence like steel. "Enough, Rachel, let's go." And I did. I walked out of that restaurant with my head held high while behind us. Panic erupted as the waiter demanded payment. The cool night air of Chicago wrapped around me like freedom. For years, I'd been their safety net. That night, the net disappeared. At a quiet cafe later, Margaret finally spoke. "This wasn't the first time, was it?" Tears filled my eyes. "No, it's gotten worse since I retired. They treat me like a bank, not a mother." Margaret took my hand. Her skin was frail, but her grip was strong. "Rachel, it's time for consequences, and I can help." I frowned. "What do you mean? I'm dying," she said simply. The world went silent. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Less than a year." I stared at her, the words refusing to settle. She had always been the strongest woman I knew. "I've been watching how your children treat you," she continued. "And I won't let my legacy end up in their hands if they don't deserve it." From her purse, she pulled a thick envelope sealed with a law firm's crest. "This is my will. I'm leaving my entire estate, nearly $2 billion, to you. But there's a condition. For the next 6 months, you must set firm boundaries with your children. No more money. No more being their ATM. If you hold firm, it's yours. If you cave, it all goes to charity." I stared at her. "Why?" "Because you deserve to live with respect, not fear, and because I want to see you reclaim your power before I go." That night, alone on my porch, I stared at the garden I'd built with decades of work. My phone buzzed with furious messages from Clara and David demanding to know why I'd embarrassed them. For once, I didn't answer. The next day, I invited them to my house. At 3 p.m. Sharp, they arrived. Clara in designer clothes, David in his work suit, both looking self-righteous. "What the hell was last night?" Clara barked the moment she stepped in. "If you can't speak respectfully, leave," I said. The shock on their faces was almost comical. "You left us with a $5,000 bill that you created," I replied. David tried to smooth things over. Come on, Mom, don't be dramatic. I set my teacup down deliberately. Enough. For years, you've treated me like a wallet, not a person. That ends now. No more money. No more loans. You're adults. Act like it. Silence. Then chaos. Clara leapt up. This is absurd. I just opened my boutique. You promised. I already gave you $250,000. Use it wisely. David tried to negotiate. Clara accused my friend Margaret of brainwashing me. Robert mumbled something about sudden changes. Maybe I was changing. Maybe for the first time, I was standing tall. This isn't pride, I told Clara. It's self-respect. She stormed out, Robert trailing behind. David just stared at me, speechless. Are you okay? He finally asked. For the first time in years, he actually meant it. I'm finding my way, I answered. That night, I sat alone in the silence, terrified, liberated, and for the first time in decades, in control. The weeks after that confrontation were eerily quiet. No daily calls demanding small favors, no cheerful manipulation wrapped in family warmth. Just silence. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. Mrs. Rachel? This is the nurse at Lakeside High. Your granddaughter Emily fainted during gym. She asked us to call you. My heart dropped. I arrived to find her pale, trembling in a chair. She was 15, usually full of life. What happened? I asked, kneeling beside her. The nurse explained she hadn't eaten properly in days. When we were alone, Emily burst into tears. Everything's a mess, Grandma. Mom and Dad fight all the time. There's barely food at home. Mom says we're in survival mode because of what you did. Guilt hit me like a wave. Then I realized I hadn't caused this. Clara had chosen to prioritize her failing boutique over her children's well-being. Did you eat today? I asked gently. She shook her head. Come on, I said, helping her up. We're fixing that right now. I took her to a diner and watched her devour her food like she hadn't eaten in days. Then I called Clara. Megan is with me, I said calmly. She fainted at school from not eating properly. A tense silence. What are you implying? Clara snapped. I'm not implying, I'm stating facts. She's staying with me tonight. Tomorrow, you and Robert are coming for dinner. We're talking, for your kids' sake. The next evening, they came. Robert stiff, Clara defensive, my grandson Luke tired and withdrawn. During dinner, no one spoke. Finally, Clara slammed her fork down. So what is this, Mom? You trying to prove you're a better parent? No, I said evenly. I'm trying to help your children because right now they're the ones paying for your mistakes. Before she could explode, Luke spoke. It's true, Mom. You blew through Grandma's money in weeks. You bought overpriced Italian stock nobody wants. You rented the most expensive space in the mall. And now we're the ones suffering. Clara stared at her son, stunned. How dare you? It's true, Luke's voice cracked. You blame Grandma, but it's you. Robert cleared his throat. Luke, and you. Luke turned to his father. You just complain but do nothing. Emily's quiet voice broke the tension. I just want you to stop fighting. I can't sleep anymore. For the first time, Clara's mask flipped. She looked fragile. I'm trying, she whispered. I'm trying to hold it all together. Alone? I asked softly. Like you always do? Even when I offered to teach you how to manage money? She frowned, confused. How many times did I offer to help you actually learn to run a business? I asked. You always refused. You only ever asked for more money. Robert surprised us all. She's right, Clara. You never wanted to learn. You wanted a safety net. Her money. For a moment, I thought Clara would lash out. Instead, her shoulders sagged. She buried her face in her hands. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I never did. That raw honesty? I hadn't seen it in her since she was a scared little girl clutching my hand at the orphanage. The problem was never ability, I said gently. You're smart. But you never had to try because I always fixed everything." She lifted her red, tear-streaked face. "And now you've taken that away." "Yes," I said, "because I believe you can fly without it." Robert spoke again, surprisingly steady. "She's right. We need to fix this ourselves." That night, a new deal was struck. Luke and Emily moved into my house temporarily. No more skipped meals, no shouting at night. I offered Clara something unexpected: mentorship, not money. I began going to her boutique with her, combing through her disastrous finances, cutting unnecessary costs, renegotiating with suppliers, showing her how to build something real. And to my surprise, beneath all the attitude, Clara listened. She learned. For the first time in years, we worked side by side like a real team. Meanwhile, 3 weeks after our blow-up, David showed up at my door alone. No wife, no business bravado. "I heard you're helping Clara," he said, accepting a cup of coffee. "I am," I replied simply. He sighed. "I realized I was headed down the same road. Depending on you to bail me out? I'm changing that. I'm focusing on making my company self-sufficient. And," he hesitated, "I realized I barely know you. Who are you, besides the woman who always wrote checks?" The question caught me off guard. "I'm a teacher," I said slowly, "an artist, a friend, a woman who built her life from scratch after losing her husband at 42. Someone who loves history, watercolors, and sunrise walks." He smiled shyly. "I'd like to get to know that woman." For the first time in years, hope stirred. As months passed, the 6-month test Margaret had set began to shape our lives. Clara downsized her boutique, renegotiated rent, and slowly stabilized. She wasn't thriving yet, but she was standing on her own 2 feet. David became more independent, visiting me not for money but for conversation. The grandkids flourished in the stability of my home, and every day Margaret's health declined. I visited her in the hospital daily. Her body weakened, but her mind was sharp. "You're passing the test," she whispered one afternoon, her hand fragile in mine. "It's not about the money anymore," I confessed. "It's about finally having a real family." She smiled faintly. "That was the real test, Rachel." It always was. 3 weeks later, Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep. I held her hand until the end, whispering my thanks. Her funeral was a grand affair. Business leaders, politicians, half of Chicago's elite, and among them, Clara and David stood quietly, humbled, perhaps realizing too late just how much this woman had done for us all. A week later, her lawyer gathered us in his office. Clara, David, their spouses, the grandchildren. He pressed play on a video. Margaret's face appeared, thinner but still commanding. "If you're watching this, I've already left this world," she began. "And before my decisions are revealed, I want you to understand why." She looked straight into the camera, her gaze sharp as ever. "I've watched how Rachel's family treated her, laughed at her humiliation, used her like a bank, ignored her accomplishments. Especially you, Clara, the child she adopted and loved as her own. You turned cruelty into an art. And you, David, your indifference was just as harmful." Clara shifted in her seat. David looked at the floor. Margaret smiled. "So, I decided to intervene, and that was when everything changed." The lawyer, Mr. Christ. Walters turned off the video and cleared his throat. "The will is very clear. Helen," he paused, catching himself. "Margaret has left her entire estate, companies, properties, investments, valued at approximately $2 billion, to Rachel." The room erupted. Clara gasped audibly. David went pale. Robert stared, calculating. The grandchildren just sat in stunned silence. "There's more, Mr. Beau." Walters continued. "Margaret established trust funds with strict conditions for each of you." He turned to Clara first. "For you, Clara, a trust of $5 million. Accessible only after 5 years of full-time work at a non-profit organization at minimum wage. No financial help from Rachel allowed during that time. Clara shot out of her chair. This is insane. She can't control my life from the grave. Actually, the lawyer said calmly, she can. And she did. He turned to David. For you, David, a similar trust. 3 years of teaching in a public school in an underprivileged neighborhood. Only upon completion will the funds be released. David's jaw tightened. But my company, Mr. Walters ignored the protest and addressed the grandchildren. Each of you will receive generous educational funds, fully protected and not under your parents' control. And Robert. Robert leaned forward. You may choose to remain with Clara during her 5-year service period or divorce her now and receive $200,000. Your decision is entirely yours. Chaos exploded. Clara shouted. David argued. Robert sat stunned. Only Luke and Emily remained quiet, their eyes darting between adults like they were finally seeing the truth behind the curtain. I stood. Enough. The room fell silent. Margaret didn't just leave me her fortune, I said. She left me the power to modify these conditions, and I will. Immediately Clara softened. Mom, you know we love you. That dinner, it was just a stupid joke. I held up a hand. The conditions stand. But I'll make one adjustment. If you both fulfill your service periods sincerely and completely, you will be reinstated as heirs to a portion of my estate. But if you try to contest this will, manipulate, or revert to your old ways, you'll get nothing. They stared at me, realizing for the first time that the power dynamic had shifted permanently. The months that followed were nothing short of extraordinary. Clara, after weeks of furious denial, accepted the nonprofit role. She began teaching sewing and fashion to underprivileged teens at a community center. At first, she treated it like punishment, but slowly something changed. The kids adored her creativity, her sharpness softened into mentorship, her resentment turned into purpose. David accepted his placement as a math and computer science teacher in a struggling public school. The first few months were brutal, overcrowded classrooms, underfunded programs, but somewhere along the way he rediscovered the joy of teaching. He found meaning outside of boardrooms and balance sheets. Robert chose the money. Their marriage dissolved quietly. For once, Clara faced life without a safety net. Meanwhile, Luke and Emily thrived. Between their parents' transformation and the stability of my home, they blossomed into confident, empathetic young adults. 6 months later, on my 70th birthday, Clara arrived at my house holding a thick, beautifully crafted photo album. Open it, she said quietly. Inside were photographs of her work at the nonprofit, smiling teenagers, handmade garments, fashion shows held in community halls. On the last page, in her careful handwriting, she had written, "Thank you for forcing me to discover who I could be, instead of who I became." The lesson was hard but necessary. With love, Clara. My throat tightened. David handed me a letter, simple, heartfelt, thanking me for the chance to rebuild their relationship on truth, not dependency. That evening, as the sun set over my garden, I raised a glass of champagne to the sky. "Well played, Margaret," I whispered. Well played. It wasn't loud revenge. It wasn't dramatic courtroom battles or fiery confrontations. It was the quiet, elegant revenge of boundaries, dignity, and legacy. By saying no and standing firm, I didn't destroy my children, I transformed them. And perhaps that was the greatest revenge of all. If this story gave you chills, imagine what's coming next. Tap subscribe, hit that like button, and tell us in the comments, would you have set the same conditions or walked away completely? Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching them grow